It was a cold, damp morning when we decided to hike into the Hoh rainforest in Olympic National Park. The air smelled fresh, with a mix of wet earth and the faint tang of moss that clung to the towering trees. The dense canopy above let in only speckled light, giving the forest floor a muted, shadowy look. Each step felt cushioned by a thick layer of decayed leaves and needles, dampened further by the persistent mist that seemed to cling to everything. I'd always been drawn to places like this. There was something humbling about walking among trees that had stood for centuries, their trunks massive and their branches twisting into shapes you'd expect in old legends. The sound of rushing water from a distant creek mingled with the occasional chirp of a bird or rustle of leaves, making the world feel alive but strangely muted, like the forest itself was whispering secrets you weren't meant to hear. The plan was simple: hike a few miles in, enjoy the quiet, and maybe catch a glimpse of wildlife. I'd read about the elk in this area, massive creatures with antlers that seemed almost otherworldly. Spotting one from a safe distance would have been the highlight of the day. But I wasn't prepared for what we stumbled upon. About 2 miles into the hike, we started hearing voices, laughter and chatter. It wasn't uncommon to encounter other hikers, but this felt louder, more chaotic. As we rounded a bend, the trees opened up to a small clearing, and that's when we saw them. There must have been at least a dozen people, a mix of adults and kids, spread out across the clearing. But it wasn't just the people that caught my eye. In the middle of it all stood a bull elk, easily the largest animal I'd ever seen in the wild. Its antlers were enormous, branching out like the limbs of a small tree, and its body was a wall of muscle. A few cows and calves lingered nearby, grazing nervously, their ears flicking in all directions. The tourists, however, didn't seem nervous at all. They were acting as if the elk were part of a petting zoo. Some stood a mere arm's length away, phones out, taking selfies with the bull in the background. One man was crouched down, gesturing for his kid to walk closer to the elk, while another woman giggled as she posed with her back to the massive creature. The worst part? It was clearly mating season. You could tell by the way the bull held its head high, the tension in its body. The animal was on edge, ready to protect its herd or assert its dominance at the slightest provocation. We froze at the edge of the clearing, my heart pounding in my chest. I whispered to my group, urging them to stay back. The danger was obvious to anyone who understood wildlife, but these people were oblivious. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Didn't they know how dangerous elk could be, especially during the rut? One of the women waved at us and shouted something like, "Come take a picture." Her voice carried, sharp and bright, completely out of place in the stillness of the forest. I ignored her and instead called out, trying to warn them. "You need to back away," I yelled, my voice trembling slightly. "It's not safe. You're too close." A few heads turned, but no one seemed to take me seriously. One man waved dismissively, as if I was some overly cautious park ranger. Another person rolled their eyes, and I overheard someone mutter, "They're just animals. They won't do anything." My frustration boiled over. How could they be so ignorant? I tried again, louder this time. "That's a wild animal. You're putting yourselves and your kids in danger." Still, they didn't listen. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was pushed forward by what I assumed were her parents. She looked hesitant, glancing back at them with wide eyes, but they encouraged her to go closer to the elk. The bull snorted, a deep, guttural sound that made my stomach drop. This massive head turned toward the girl, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. I held my breath, praying that someone would have the sense to pull her back. But instead, the man crouching nearby clapped his hands, trying to get the elk's attention for a better photo. The animal jerked its head, its antlers catching the light in a way that made them look even more menacing. And then it happened. The bull let out a loud, piercing bugle, a sound that echoed through the forest and sent a shiver down my spine. It stomped the ground, its muscles rippling as it took a step forward. The little girl screamed and ran back toward her parents, tears streaming down her face. The adults finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Chaos erupted. Some people ran, their movements frantic and clumsy. Others froze, unsure of what to do. The bull didn't charge, but it held its ground, pawing at the earth and bugling again. The cows and calves began to move away, their instincts telling them to flee, but the bull stayed, its eyes locked on the retreating group. We didn't stick around to see what would happen next. I grabbed my group and urged them to keep moving, staying well off the main trail to avoid drawing the elk's attention. My heart was racing as we navigated the dense undergrowth, every snap of a twig making me flinch. When we were far enough away, we paused to catch our breath. The forest was silent again, but the tension lingered in the air. I couldn't stop thinking about how close that little girl had come to serious harm, all because her parents wanted a photo. It was reckless, stupid, and utterly infuriating. Back at the trailhead, we reported what we'd seen to a ranger. He nodded grimly, explaining that it wasn't the first time tourists had put themselves in danger for the sake of a picture. "People forget these are wild animals," he said, his tone weary. "They think the rules don't apply to them until something happens." As we drove away from the park, I couldn't shake the image of that bull elk, its antlers gleaming in the dappled sunlight, and the little girl standing frozen in its shadow. It was a reminder that nature isn't something to be taken lightly or treated like a backdrop for selfies. It's powerful, unpredictable, and deserving of respect. The forest, in all its beauty, had shown us a glimpse of its darker side that day. And while no one was hurt, the lesson was clear. You don't mess with the wild. Not ever. It started as a solo trip to clear my mind. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, just the usual stress of work and life piling up. I had booked a cabin deep in the woods, miles from any town or sign of civilization. It seemed perfect, a chance to unplug and reset. The drive was long, and the paved roads eventually turned into dirt ones. Tall trees lined the path on either side, their shadows creeping over the car as the sun dipped lower in the sky. I arrived just as dusk began to settle. The cabin was small but sturdy, a single-story wooden structure with a tiny porch and a swing that creaked in the breeze. Behind it, the forest stretched endlessly, dense and dark. The first night was uneventful. I lit a fire, cooked a simple meal, and read until I felt drowsy. The quiet was overwhelming, but I welcomed it. I slept soundly, the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves outside. The next morning, I decided to explore. I'd read about a nearby trail leading to a small waterfall, and the thought of finding it excited me. Armed with a map, a bottle of water, and some snacks, I set out. The trailhead was easy to find, marked by a weathered wooden sign that read Willow Falls. The path was narrow but clear, winding through the forest like a thread through fabric. The air smelled of earth and pine, and the occasional chirp of a bird or rustle in the underbrush reminded me I wasn't completely alone out here. The walk was peaceful, and after about an hour, I reached the waterfall. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful. A stream of water cascading over rocks into a shallow pool. I sat there for a while, enjoying the view and the sound of rushing water. As I started back, the sun hung lower in the sky than I'd expected. I hadn't realized how much time had passed. I quickened my pace, not wanting to be caught in the woods after dark. That's when I noticed it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The sounds of the forest seemed to dull. No more birds chirping, no rustling leaves. Just silence, heavy and pressing. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the animals were settling down for the evening. But then I noticed something else. The faintest sound of footsteps behind me. They weren't loud, just soft crunches of leaves and twigs, almost in sync with mine. I stopped, and so did the sound. I turned quickly, scanning the trees, but there was nothing there. My heart started to pound, but I forced myself to stay calm. It was probably just an animal, I thought. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps returned. They were deliberate now, matching my speed. I didn't stop this time. I kept moving, my eyes darting from side to side, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever, or whoever it was. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it another hiker, a hunter, or something worse? The trail that had felt so welcoming earlier now seemed endless. The tall trees loomed over me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. My breath quickened, and I gripped the straps of my backpack tightly, as if it could offer some protection. Then I saw it, a figure, just for a split second, moving between the trees to my left. It was too quick to make out any details, but it was human, or at least it looked human. I stopped again, turning to face where I'd seen it, but there was nothing there now. I called out, my voice shaky, but there was no response. The silence returned, more oppressive than before. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the logical part of my brain told me not to. Running could make me seem like prey. I forced myself to walk, each step feeling heavier than the last. The cabin couldn't be far now. I just had to make it back. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cool air. I reached for my phone, thinking I could call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere. Then I heard it. A branch snapping loudly, as if something heavy had stepped on it. I turned my head just enough to see another flash of movement, this time to my right. They were circling me. Panic set in, and I started to jog, my eyes fixed on the trail ahead. The cabin wasn't far, couldn't be far, but the forest around me seemed endless, the trees stretching taller and denser with every step. The footsteps quickened too. Whoever was following me wasn't trying to hide anymore. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them. A man, dressed in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by a hood. I ran. The trail blurred as my feet pounded against the ground. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but adrenaline kept me going. I could hear him behind me, his heavy breaths and rapid steps closing the distance. The cabin came into view just as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into twilight. I sprinted up the steps, nearly tripping, and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled with the lock, my fingers trembling so much I could barely turn it. I backed away from the door, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. For a moment, there was silence again, save for the sound of my own heartbeat. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic or loud, just a single, deliberate knock. I froze, staring at the door. Another knock came, then another. Whoever it was didn't say a word, just kept knocking, slow and steady. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and held it tightly, my knuckles white. The knocking stopped, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he had left. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, moving toward the window. I turned, my eyes locking onto the glass, and saw him. His face was pale, his eyes dark, and he was staring directly at me. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran to the back of the cabin, locked myself in the bedroom, and pushed the bed against the door. My hands shook as I dialed 911, praying for a signal. This time, the call went through. I whispered my location as best as I could, explaining that someone was trying to break in. The operator stayed on the line with me, assuring me help was on the way. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes before I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The man must have heard them too, because the knocking stopped and the footsteps retreated. When the police arrived, they found no sign of him. No footprints, no evidence he'd been there at all. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I didn't stay another night. I packed my things and left, the feeling of being watched lingering long after I'd driven away. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I've never felt safe in the woods again. The cabin remains rented out to others, and maybe they've never experienced anything strange. But I'll never go back. I'll never forget, and I'll never wander into the woods alone again. It was late August when my dad and I decided to set up a game cam in the valley. The area was known for being a hot spot for elk, and with his hunting season approaching, he wanted to get a better sense of the herd's patterns. The spot wasn't too far from where we'd parked the Jeep, maybe a 30-minute hike into the woods. It was quiet out there, serene, and almost unsettling at times. The kind of place where the silence pressed on your ears until the faint rustle of leaves or the crack of a branch made you jump. The first day we set up the camera, the heat was sweltering. I remember beads of sweat sliding down the back of my neck as we lugged the gear to the chosen spot. We found a clearing near a well-worn animal trail, nestled between two large fir trees. The dirt was soft, scattered with tracks, hooves and paw prints overlapping in the dust. Dad said it was a good sign, and I trusted him. He'd been hunting these woods for years, long before I was old enough to come along. We secured the game cam to one of the trees, aiming it toward the trail. Dad adjusted the angle a few times before stepping back and nodding in satisfaction. The camera was set to capture motion-triggered photos with night vision for after dark. We left it there, hidden among the branches, and hiked back to the Jeep. The forest swallowed us in its green depths, the occasional chirp of birds or distant hum of insects our only company. 2 weeks later, we returned to retrieve the camera. The day started cool, with a thin layer of fog clinging to the ground, but the sun quickly burned through as we made our way into the valley. The trail felt different this time, quieter, maybe. I chalked it up to my imagination, but I couldn't shake the slight unease that settled in my chest. When we reached the clearing, the camera was still there, untouched. Dad pulled it down and handed it to me to check the pictures. The screen on the back was small, the resolution grainy, but it did the job. The first few shots were typical. Elk grazing, a raccoon scurrying past, and even a curious deer sniffing at the lens. As I scrolled through the images, the timestamps showed the days ticking by, the camera capturing life in the valley while we were away. Then I got to the last image. It was timestamped 3 hours before we arrived, and my stomach tightened when I saw it. A mountain lion. It stood right there in the clearing, the same spot where I was now standing. Its body was sleek, muscles rippling under tawny fur, and its eyes glowed in the infrared light. It was looking directly at the camera, ears slightly back, as if it had heard something or someone. My heart thudded in my chest as I showed the picture to Dad. He didn't say a word, just nodded and started packing up the camera. The hike back to the Jeep felt like an eternity. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig had my nerves on edge. The trees loomed taller, their shadows stretching across the trail as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the lion silently stalking us. Dad led the way, his pace steady but purposeful. He carried a rifle slung over his shoulder, and though he didn't seem panicked, I could tell he was on high alert. I stayed close behind, gripping the strap of my backpack so tightly my knuckles ached. The thought of that lion, somewhere out there in the valley, made my skin crawl. It had been here just hours ago, and we were walking right through its territory. About halfway back, we found fresh tracks on the trail. They were unmistakable, paw prints pressed into the dirt, large and distinct. My mouth went dry. They hadn't been there on the way in. I didn't say anything, and neither did Dad. We just kept moving, our steps careful and deliberate. The forest seemed to grow quieter with each passing minute, the usual chirps and rustles fading into an eerie stillness. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting. At one point, Dad stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to signal me to freeze. He tilted his head, listening intently. My pulse pounded in my ears as I strained to hear what had caught his attention. There it was, a faint rustling in the underbrush, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the trail. My heart jumped into my throat. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, barely breathing, until the sound faded. Dad motioned for me to keep moving, and we picked up the pace, our steps quick and quiet. The Jeep was still a good 10 minutes away, and every inch of me was on edge. When we finally reached the edge of the valley, the sight of the Jeep was like a lifeline. Dad unlocked it, and we climbed in as quickly as we could, slamming the doors behind us. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I buckled my seatbelt, but it was short-lived. As Dad started the engine, I couldn't help but glance back toward the trees. The forest stood silent and still, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped below the horizon. We hadn't seen the lion again, but I knew it was out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The drive home was quiet. Dad and I didn't talk much, each lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't stop replaying the last image on the game cam in my mind. The lion standing there, so close, so real. It was a stark reminder of just how wild those woods were, and how easily we could have become prey. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of the lion's glowing eyes lingered, a haunting image that stayed with me long after the adrenaline had worn off. It was a sobering experience, a reminder of how small we are in the grand scheme of things, and how nature doesn't play by our rules. The valley was beautiful, no doubt about it, but it wasn't ours. It belonged to the creatures that lived there, and that day we'd come far too close to one of its most dangerous inhabitants. I didn't go back to that spot again, and as far as I know, neither did Dad. My uncle, a long-haul truck driver, had been on the road for most of his life. The stories he'd told me over the years ranged from amusing to downright unbelievable, but there was one that he rarely shared, one that still made him shudder years after it happened. It wasn't a ghost story or some supernatural nonsense. It was something real, something he couldn't explain, but it left him rattled in a way that no man his size and grit usually got. It was around 11 p.m. on a clear winter night in South Queensland. He was driving through the mountainous regions, the kind of area where the stars are so bright they make the landscape seem alive in the dark. The air was crisp, and the occasional glow of headlights in the distance reminded him he wasn't completely alone out there. That night, he was hauling a shipment of building supplies, a standard run, and was making good time. But nature called, and he knew he'd need to stop soon. The stretch of road he was on wasn't exactly ideal for stopping. It wound tightly around the hillsides, with sharp turns and steep drops. Eventually, though, he spotted a small pull-off area, a gravel patch barely wide enough for his rig. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. He eased the truck to a stop, killed the engine, and climbed out, the crunch of gravel under his boots loud in the quiet night. The first thing he noticed was the stillness, the kind of stillness that presses in on you, making every sound feel amplified. The occasional car passed by, its headlights briefly lighting up the road ahead before disappearing around the bend, leaving only the faint hum of tires fading into the night. Beyond the road, the dense forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. He walked a few paces away from the truck, not wanting to risk the smell of diesel clinging to him. The air was cold enough to make him see his breath, and he zipped his jacket up higher as he stepped closer to the edge of the woods. That's when he heard it, a deep, resonating thump that seemed to echo through the trees. He froze. At first, he thought it was his imagination. The sound was faint but deliberate, like something heavy landing on the forest floor. He stood there, ears straining, trying to figure out what it could be. Another thump followed, this time closer. He glanced back at his truck, debating whether to just climb back in and keep driving, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of him. His boots crunched softly as he took a cautious step toward the treeline, squinting into the darkness. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to shift as he moved. Another thump. Louder this time. Closer. His first thought was an animal, maybe a kangaroo or an emu, but kangaroos are skittish. They don't hang around once they sense a human, and emus don't come this far into the mountains. He'd seen his fair share of wildlife in his years of driving, but nothing about this felt normal. The sound came again, steady and deliberate. It wasn't a random noise, like branches falling or rocks shifting. It was rhythmic, purposeful. He crouched slightly, trying to get a better look into the forest. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, picking out the faint outlines of tree trunks and undergrowth. And then he saw it, just a glimpse at first. Something big moved between the trees, its shape partially obscured by the shadows. It was upright, tall, and broad. The way it moved was what unsettled him the most. Slow, deliberate, as if it knew he was there and wasn't in any hurry to hide. He backed up a step, his boots crunching on the gravel. The sound was barely audible, but whatever it was in the woods heard it. It stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. He stood there, frozen, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. Then the thumping started again, but this time it was faster, more forceful. It was heading straight toward him. Panic set in. He turned and bolted back to his truck, his boots slipping on the loose gravel. He could hear the thumps behind him, each one louder than the last. Whatever it was closing the distance. He didn't dare look back. He reached the truck, yanked the door open, and scrambled inside, slamming the door shut behind him. His hands fumbled for the keys, his breath coming in gasps. The cab felt suffocatingly small as he finally managed to jam the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life and he threw the truck into gear. As he pulled away, his headlights swept across the edge of the forest. For a split second, he saw it. A massive, hulking figure standing just beyond the treeline. Its eyes caught the light, reflecting back like a predator's. And then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. He didn't stop driving until he was miles away, back on a busier stretch of road. Even then, he kept checking his mirrors, half expecting to see the thing chasing him. Later, when he tried to make sense of what happened, he considered all the possibilities. Maybe it was a big animal, a really big one, but no animal he knew moved like that or made a sound like that. And the way it stopped and started, almost as if it were toying with him, it didn't feel like an animal. He never went back to that stretch of road, and he never told anyone the exact location. Nothing good comes from poking at things you don't understand, he'd say. I've asked him about it a few times since then, but he just shakes his head and changes the subject. Whatever he saw or thought he saw out there that night, it left a mark on him. A man like him, who spent his life on the road and seen it all, doesn't scare easy. But when he talks about that night, you can see it in his eyes. He's still scared. It was late in the season, deep into October, when a buddy and I decided to go camping in the Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. The campgrounds had already closed for the year, but the crisp air and the stillness of the forest called to us. Both of us had been camping all over Colorado and Utah for years. We knew how to pick a spot, set up camp, and handle ourselves out in the wild. But something about this trip, something about the place we chose, felt different from the start. We drove along a random road, twisting deeper into the canyon, until we found a pull-off that seemed as good a spot as any. The place was secluded, hidden by thick stands of pine and aspen, and felt miles away from anyone or anything. It was the kind of isolation we were looking for. But as soon as we parked and started unloading our gear, a strange unease crept over me. It wasn't the kind of feeling you could explain outright, just a gut instinct that this spot was off. We shrugged it off, blaming it on the overcast sky and the silence of the late-season forest. Once we had set up camp, we decided to take a short hike before the sun set. We hadn't gone more than 20 yards from our campsite when we found it. A blanket. It was old and filthy, bunched up against a tree. Out of curiosity or maybe instinct, we gave it a nudge with the toe of a boot. That's when we saw the skeletal remains of some kind of animal. It wasn't much more than bones and matted fur, but it had clearly been wrapped up and left there on purpose. Probably someone's pet, I muttered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Why would someone hike out here to leave a pet like this? We didn't linger. The blanket and its morbid contents cast a shadow over the evening, but we pressed on. We hiked uphill, climbing through rocky terrain and weaving through trees until we reached a clearing. That's where we spotted the tent. It was tucked into the branches of a tree, old and weathered but unmistakably a tent. Its fabric flapped gently in the breeze, and the sight of it made my stomach tighten. My buddy and I exchanged glances, neither of us eager to investigate, but curiosity got the better of us. Climbing up, we found it was empty of people but not belongings. Inside were several notebooks and a sleeping bag, both worn and dirty. The notebooks were filled with writing, pages and pages of cramped, hurried handwriting, but we didn't take the time to read them. Something about rifling through someone else's abandoned tent felt wrong, even if it looked like no one had been there in years. We left the tent behind and continued exploring, eventually deciding to head back to camp. The downhill hike was steep, the kind of slope where you had to watch your footing carefully or risk sliding all the way down. That's when the smell hit us. It was the unmistakable stench of death, a rancid, heavy odor that clung to the air. Following the smell wasn't something we wanted to do, but it was hard to ignore. We found the source soon enough. A small towel, knotted tightly around something, nestled into the crook of a tree. It was perched there deliberately, almost like an offering, and the whole setup sent shivers down my spine. Whatever was inside the towel was the source of the smell. We didn't open it then. We didn't touch it at all. "This place is weird," my buddy muttered, his voice low. I nodded, feeling the same. We left the towel where it was and continued down the hill, eager to put distance between us and that spot. Back at camp, we tried to shake off the unease. We built a fire, poured some bourbon, and tried to convince ourselves that everything we'd seen was just coincidence. The blanket, the tent, the towel, they were strange, sure, but not necessarily sinister. And yet, the feeling lingered. After a few more drinks, we decided to go back. I don't know if it was courage or stupidity, but we wanted answers. Armed with a sturdy stick and a flashlight, we retraced our steps up the steep hillside. The smell grew stronger as we approached, a nauseating reminder of what we were about to do. My buddy used the stick to carefully untangle the towel, peeling it back layer by layer. Inside was an owl. It was freshly dead, its feathers still sleek and its eyes closed as if in sleep. Someone had killed it, wrapped it in that towel, and carried it up the steep hill to place it in the tree. The deliberateness of it all made my skin crawl. We didn't stay up there long. The discovery left us with more questions than answers, and no amount of bourbon could settle the nerves it stirred. Back at camp, we didn't talk much. The forest around us seemed darker, the shadows deeper. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sent our heads snapping around, searching for something or someone that wasn't there. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the first light broke through the trees, we packed up and left. The eerie feeling followed us down the road, all the way back to civilization. We never spoke of it again, not in detail. It wasn't something we wanted to relive or dwell on. To this day, I don't know what was going on in that part of the woods. Maybe it was nothing more than a series of strange coincidences. Or maybe we stumbled onto something or someone we weren't supposed to. Whatever it was, I've never been back to that spot. Some places are better left alone. It had been an exhausting but rewarding 7 days of paddling through Algonquin Park's endless waterways. My canoe trip was everything I had hoped for. Quiet mornings with mist hovering over the water, loons calling out into the stillness, and nights filled with stars so bright they seemed unreal. But now, I was back in the parking lot, my body aching and my gear damp and heavy as I began the final task of packing up my car. The parking lot was quiet, the kind of emptiness you'd expect on a weekday afternoon deep in the woods. I hadn't seen another soul since returning to shore earlier that morning. The lot itself was a dusty stretch of gravel and dirt surrounded by towering pines. My car sat there, baking in the sunlight, its windows fogged with humidity from being closed up for a week. As I started unloading my gear, canoe paddles, a sodden tent, food barrels that now smelled faintly of bear spray, I heard voices. They came from the far end of the lot, just chatter at first, then laughter. The sound stood out against the otherwise quiet backdrop, and I paused, wiping the sweat from my forehead and looking up. A small group of people had pulled in, their car parked 2 spots over. They were tourists, judging by their clothes and the excited tone of their conversation. I didn't pay them much attention. I was too focused on loading my things into the trunk so I could start the long drive home. Then I saw it. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. There was movement in the tree line at the edge of the parking lot. Something big. My first thought was bear. The shape was massive and dark, but as it stepped into the open, I realized I was wrong. It was a bull moose, a giant, majestic animal, its antlers spreading wide like the crown of a tree. The moose sauntered into the lot with a deliberate calm, its long legs carrying it over the uneven ground with ease. I froze, my hands still clutching the handle of my cooler. The tourists noticed it too. Their chatter stopped abruptly, replaced by gasps and whispers. One of them, a man with a camera slung around his neck, pointed toward the animal, and the others followed his gaze. The moose seemed unfazed by the sudden attention, its dark eyes scanning the parking lot as it continued its slow walk between the rows of cars. I ducked behind my car instinctively, crouching low so that only my head peeked over the edge of the trunk. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear. There was something awe-inspiring about the moose's presence, something almost otherworldly in its sheer size and grace. I reached for my phone, fumbling to unlock it with shaky hands. This was a moment I didn't want to forget. As I started recording, the moose moved closer, its massive hooves crunching against the gravel. It was close enough now that I could hear its heavy breathing, each exhale a deep, audible snort. I held my breath, my finger steady on the record button. It was a once-in-a-lifetime sight, and I wasn't going to miss it. But then, to my disbelief, one of the tourists decided to get closer. It was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, wearing a bright red jacket and carrying a small camera in one hand. While the rest of the group stayed where they were, this guy started walking toward the moose, his steps confident, almost casual. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The moose noticed him immediately. Its head turned, the massive antlers tilting slightly as it fixed its gaze on the approaching figure. The man didn't stop. He raised his camera, snapping pictures as he got closer and closer. My hands gripped the edge of my car, my breath catching in my throat. What the hell is he doing? I thought. Didn't he know how dangerous these animals could be? The moose stopped walking, its body tensing. I could see the muscles in its neck tighten, its ears swiveling back slightly. It let out a deep snort, a warning if there ever was one. But the tourist didn't stop. He was less than 10 feet away now, close enough that I could see the glint of excitement in his eyes as he raised his camera again. And then, to my absolute horror, he reached out a hand. The moose's reaction was immediate. It let out a sharp grunt, its head jerking toward the man as if to say, "Back off." The sound was loud enough to echo across the parking lot, startling the other tourists, who were now shouting at their friend to stop. For a moment, I thought the moose was going to charge. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios, imagining the sheer devastation those antlers could cause if it decided to attack. But it didn't. Instead, the moose took a single step back, snorted again, and then turned sharply toward the forest. Its long legs carried it away in a few swift strides, disappearing into the trees almost as quickly as it had appeared. The man stood there, stunned, his outstretched hand frozen midair. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, he started to follow it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man jogged after the moose, his camera still in hand, shouting something unintelligible as he tried to keep up. The rest of his group shouted after him, but he ignored them, disappearing into the woods after the animal. I stood up slowly, my heart still racing. The parking lot was silent again, save for the distant sound of the man crashing through the underbrush. The rest of the tourists were frozen in place, their faces pale with shock. I wanted to say something, to yell at them for letting their friend do something so stupid, but the words wouldn't come. Minutes passed. The man didn't come back. I could only hope the moose had managed to lose him in the dense forest, sparing both of them from a potentially deadly encounter. I stayed behind my car, phone in hand, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. Eventually, the rest of the group began calling out the man's name, their voices shaky and uncertain. They ventured into the woods a short distance but quickly turned back, too nervous to go far. I stayed there for what felt like hours, my gear still scattered around the parking lot, my body frozen in a mix of shock and disbelief. The man never returned, not while I was there anyway. As I finally loaded the last of my things into the car and climbed into the driver's seat, I couldn't shake the image of him reaching out toward the moose, completely oblivious to the danger. As I drove away, the forest closed in around the road, the towering pines swallowing the sunlight. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man stumbling out of the woods or the moose charging out of nowhere. But the road stayed empty, the parking lot shrinking into the distance until it was nothing more than a memory. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we all came to witnessing something horrific. Wild animals aren't there for our amusement. They're not pets, and they're not props for Instagram photos. That man was lucky, luckier than he'll probably ever realize. And as much as I'd been in awe of the moose, I was even more in awe of its restraint. Could have easily defended itself, could have turned that parking lot into a scene of chaos. But it didn't. It just walked away. I'll never forget that day. The moose, the man, the silence that followed. It's all etched into my memory like a cautionary tale. Nature is beautiful, but it's not forgiving. And sometimes we're reminded of that in ways we'll never forget. I never thought I'd have the guts to camp in the Amazon forest. The idea sounded wild when my friends first mentioned it. Staying in the middle of one of the most dangerous places on Earth, surrounded by creatures I had only seen in nature documentaries. But somehow I let myself get talked into it, Maybe it was the thrill of doing something outside my comfort zone, or the way they made it sound like an adventure I'd never forget. Either way, there I was in Brazil, pitching a tent in the heart of the jungle. The first couple of days had been surreal. The dense green canopy above us barely let sunlight touch the ground. Every step we took was accompanied by the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the occasional snapping of twigs underfoot. It was beautiful, yes, but also unnervingly alive. There wasn't a single moment of true silence. The jungle always seemed to breathe and hum around us, like it was watching. That night, we had settled into our tents after a long day of hiking and exploring. The air was thick and humid, clinging to my skin even as I tried to relax. I could hear the others murmuring in their tents, their voices blending into the night's symphony of insects and distant animal calls. Exhausted, I eventually fell into a restless sleep. But in the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly. First, I thought it was a dream. I lay there for a moment trying to orient myself before I realized why I had woken up. I really needed to pee. I groaned inwardly. Of all the times for nature to call, it had to be now, in the pitch-black middle of the Amazon. I didn't want to wake anyone by fumbling around the campsite, so I decided to quietly take care of it myself. Grabbing a flashlight, I unzipped my tent as quietly as possible and stepped outside. The cool night air hit me immediately, a stark contrast to the sticky warmth inside the tent. I could barely see a thing, relying only on the dim moonlight filtering through the treetops. I didn't want to shine the flashlight too much, just in case it attracted bugs, or worse, something bigger. I walked a little way from the camp, just far enough so I wouldn't disturb anyone or risk someone accidentally walking in on me. The ground was uneven, and every step made me hyper-aware of my surroundings. My heart was already racing, and I hadn't even stopped yet. Finally, I found a spot that seemed okay. Hidden enough but not so far that I couldn't find my way back. I squatted down, hovering just above the ground, and tried to do my business quickly. The jungle around me seemed impossibly loud now, every chirp and rustle amplified by my nervousness. That's when I heard it. A soft crunch, like a footstep, came from behind me. I froze. My entire body went rigid, and my breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, a deliberate, measured step on the forest floor. I didn't dare turn my head, too afraid of what I might see. Whatever it was, it sounded big, the kind of big that made you feel small and defenseless. My mind raced through possibilities. A jaguar? A tapir? Some other animal I couldn't even name? Or was it a person? The thought made my stomach churn. I forced myself to stay still, finishing as quickly as I could, though every second felt like an eternity. My legs were trembling, and not just from the awkward position. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. As soon as I was done, I stood up, pulling up my pants as fast as humanly possible without making any sudden movements. I still hadn't turned around, too scared to confirm what I already knew. Something was there, and then I heard it again. Another step, closer this time. I didn't think, I just ran. My legs moved before my brain could process what was happening. I sprinted back toward the camp, flashlight in hand, but not even using it. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip me with every step, but adrenaline kept me going. I could hear my own panicked breathing, loud and ragged, and every now and then, the faint sound of movement behind me. Was it following me? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. When I reached the camp, I dove into my tent and zipped it up as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly that it took a couple of tries to get it closed. Once inside, I curled up in my sleeping bag, trying to calm myself down. I listened for any sounds outside, straining to hear past the pounding in my ears. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just the usual cacophony of the jungle at night. Eventually, My breathing slowed, and the adrenaline began to fade. I stayed awake for what felt like hours, too scared to fall asleep. My mind kept replaying those footsteps, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it an animal? If so, why didn't it attack? Was it a person? And if it was, what were they doing out there in the middle of the Amazon, so far from civilization? Morning came, and with it, a sense of uneasy relief. The jungle looked completely different in the daylight, almost peaceful, as if nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't want to sound paranoid or scare the group, but as we packed up and continued our journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched. Whatever it was that had followed me, it hadn't made a move to hurt me, but it could have, and that thought stayed with me long after we left the jungle behind. Camping trips had always been my escape. The world could get loud, messy, and overwhelming, but out in the woods near the pond and clearing my friend and I had claimed as our own, life felt simple. It wasn't an official camping ground, far from it. The spot was tucked away on the edge of a national forest in California, so hidden that even frequent hikers or locals didn't seem to know about it. The only people who ever stepped foot there were the two of us. At least that's what we thought. It was early one morning when we arrived for what we had planned as another weekend trip. The sky was a gradient of pink and orange, the air still crisp from the night before. Pulling the truck into the dirt clearing where we usually parked, I felt the usual excitement of being out in the wilderness. My buddy was sitting in the passenger seat, half asleep but eager enough to help unload once we got there. As the truck rumbled to a stop, something immediately caught my eye. A flicker of movement about 20 yards away in the brush. Two figures moved through the golden grass, sleek and low to the ground. Mountain lions. At first, it was a jolt to the system. Seeing one mountain lion in the wild was rare enough, but two, and as we quickly realized, they weren't just passing through. They were mating. The scene was surreal. I mean, you hear about mountain lions, you see them on nature documentaries, but seeing them up close, right there in the wild, doing something so primal, that was a different level. We both froze, not even thinking about unloading the truck or stepping out. Let's just watch, I remember thinking. We had no plans of interfering. The windows were rolled up, the engine was off, and we weren't about to make a sound. The lions didn't seem to notice us, or if they did, they didn't care. They finished their business quickly, quicker than I would have expected for animals of their size, and settled down to rest near the edge of the clearing. It was incredible to watch them, the way they moved, the way they seemed to blend into the landscape even in broad daylight. For about 10 minutes, we sat there in awe. I even started to relax a little. Sure, mountain lions were dangerous, but they weren't paying us any mind. I figured as long as we stayed in the truck and gave them their space, there wasn't much to worry about. But then, something changed. The male lion's head shot up first, ears pricked forward. The female followed suit almost instantly, her muscles tense and her tail flicking. They were alert now, no longer lounging but scanning the area as if they'd caught wind of something dangerous. What could scare a mountain lion? I thought to myself. I couldn't hear anything through the truck's windows, but whatever it was had them spooked. The male let out a low growl, almost like a warning, and then the two of them bolted. They didn't just casually trot away. They ran, full speed, disappearing into the trees faster than I thought possible. That's when I saw the deer, 3 of them, bounding through the clearing from the same direction the lions had been watching. Their movements were frantic, panicked, like they were running for their lives. And then I saw why. A bear. Not just any bear. This thing was massive, a hulking shadow of fur and muscle barreling through the trees in pursuit of the deer. Its sheer size was enough to make my stomach drop. Black bears are common enough in California, but this one was on another level, like it had been eating well for years. The deer were fast, darting through the clearing like ghosts, but the bear wasn't far behind. It was a brutal scene, nature at its rawest. The bear didn't seem to notice us. It was completely focused on its prey, but watching it move, seeing the raw power in its stride, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding on something we had no business being part of. The deer disappeared into the trees on the other side of the clearing, the bear hot on their trail. For a moment, everything was still again, the way it had been when we first arrived. But the air felt different now, charged, dangerous. I looked over at my friend, and he looked at me. Neither of us said a word, but the message was clear. We weren't staying. We didn't even bother unloading the truck. The whole reason we loved this spot was because it felt untouched, safe, like our own little slice of the wild. But seeing all of that, mountain lions mating, deer fleeing for their lives, and a bear big enough to knock over a small car, it was a stark reminder that we were visitors here, visitors who didn't belong. I started the truck, the engine roaring to life in the quiet clearing. For a split second, I worried the sound might draw attention, but there was nothing. No movement, no signs of life, just the stillness of the forest. We drove out of there slower than usual, keeping our eyes on the tree line the entire time. Every shadow looked like it might move. Every rustle of leaves felt like it could be something charging toward us. By the time we hit the main road, the tension in the truck was palpable. We didn't talk much on the drive home, and honestly, we didn't need to. That day wasn't the end of our camping trips, but it changed the way I saw the woods. It was a reminder that nature isn't just a backdrop for our adventures. It's alive, unpredictable, and often more powerful than we give it credit for. And sometimes it's best to leave it alone. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, exploring the Olympic National Park, and had made various stops. It was the off-season, and the parks were quiet, almost eerie in their stillness. There was a sense of peaceful solitude that I appreciated, but it also felt a little unnerving at times. I had always loved the idea of escaping into the wild, but this day would remind me that sometimes being alone in the woods isn't as safe as it seems. It was a crisp, fall afternoon when I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time. I was feeling adventurous, so I took a random road that ended up at a beautiful, remote spot along the edge of the Quinault River. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden beams across the wild, rugged landscape. A small, ancient footbridge arced over the river, looking like something out of a storybook. The bridge seemed to be held together by little more than memories and the will of the forest, with wooden planks missing and rusted nails jutting out. It looked as if it might collapse if I even tried to cross it, so I decided against it. The area was quiet, too quiet. I was the only one there. No cars, no hikers, no sign of anyone for miles. And yet, as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but an unease that gnawed at me from the inside out. The weather was unusually hot for mid-fall. The sun beat down harder than I expected, and after spending some time walking around, I found myself drenched in sweat. I needed to cool off, so I decided to wade into the river. I backed my car up all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, ensuring I'd be able to leave quickly if I needed to. The last thing I wanted was to get stuck in a place like this, especially if the situation turned strange. The riverbank was steep with thick brush and tangled undergrowth. There wasn't a clear path, but I managed to push my way through the vegetation and down the embankment toward the water. I had not planned on swimming, so I was only wearing my clothes. Once I reached the edge of the river, I decided to strip down to my bra and underwear and jump in. It felt like a necessary escape from the heat, and for a moment, I lost myself in the coolness of the water. It was peaceful at first, too peaceful. I floated for a while, listening to the gentle rush of the river, letting the current pull me. But the further I let myself drift from the shore, the more I became aware of a creeping discomfort. There was no logical reason for it, but it felt as though I was being watched. It was almost like a shadow hanging over me, a presence I couldn't see but knew was there. I stopped moving and looked around, but the only thing I could see were trees and the rugged rocks on the opposite bank. No one was there. Still, the sensation didn't go away. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered. After about 5 minutes, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The river was cold now, and the discomfort of being alone in such an isolated place was too much. I started swimming back to the shore, still unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I turned my back to the river to walk toward my clothes, I froze. There, across the river on the opposite bank, stood a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his figure stark against the dense trees behind him. He wore a poncho made of animal pelts that draped over his body, and his hair was long, tangled with twigs and leaves, as if he had been living in the forest for years. The moment our eyes locked, an icy chill shot down my spine. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. Time seemed to freeze. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I felt paralyzed, my heart racing in my chest, as though it were going to explode from my body. It felt like an eternity, though I'm sure it was only a few seconds before the man turned and began to move quickly towards the old footbridge that spanned the river. I snapped out of my trance. Fear surged through me as I scrambled to grab my clothes, but the blackberry vines had entangled them, pulling them away from my reach. Panic set in. I couldn't waste any more time. I grabbed my car keys and bolted for the embankment, sprinting as fast as I could in nothing but my underwear, barefoot through the thorny brush. My feet were tearing open as I ran, blood trickling from where the thorns scraped against my skin, but I didn't care. I had to get to my car. I had to leave. The man was moving fast. I could hear his heavy footsteps behind me, crashing through the forest, the sound of him pushing through branches and vines, getting closer. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, and I was stumbling through the thick brush, barely able to see through the tangle of branches and leaves. I could hear his footsteps getting louder, and I knew he was close. My only thought was that I couldn't let him get to me. I couldn't let him cross that bridge. I finally broke through the last thicket of bushes and saw my car in the distance, parked at the edge of the dead-end road. But as I looked back, I saw him running toward the footbridge, his long strides eating up the ground. He wasn't far behind. I reached my car in a blur of panic, grabbed the door handle, and yanked it open. My body shook uncontrollably. I slammed the door shut behind me just as I saw him step onto the bridge. I fumbled with the locks, locking all the doors in a rush, my hands slick with sweat. I could hear him pounding his fists on the hood of my car, yelling, but it wasn't words. It was primal, grunting, screaming like some kind of animal. His eyes were wild, his face twisted in rage or maybe something else. But then he moved toward the driver's side door, and I saw the terror in his movements. He was going to get in. He was going to drag me out and hurt me. My heart thudded in my chest, but I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the car lurched forward, tearing out of there at full speed. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him running after me. He was faster than any man should be, running barefoot, his arms flailing, his body twisting with unnatural speed. I drove as fast as I could, my car screeching down the gravel road. I didn't dare slow down. I didn't care if my tires were spinning out of control. All I could think was, asterisk, get away. Get away now. Asterisk, I looked in the mirror again. He was still running after me. He kept going, gaining on me for what felt like an eternity. I could see his figure in the distance, getting smaller and smaller, until finally he faded from view. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I didn't care where I was. as long as it wasn't back there. I pulled into the first gas station I could find, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. I was covered in cuts and bruises from the blackberries, my body trembling from the adrenaline and fear. I sat there in the car for a long time trying to calm down, but I couldn't. My mind kept replaying the image of that man. His eyes, his stance, the way he moved through the forest like something from a nightmare. The scariest part wasn't that he was there. It was that I had no idea who he was, what he wanted, or how long he had been watching me. I had been completely alone in that wilderness, thinking I was safe, thinking I was just having an adventure. But the truth was, I had been vulnerable. I was just one more person who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. I'll never forget that feeling, the sensation of being hunted, of knowing that something or someone was out there, watching me. It stayed with me long after I left that place. Even now, I still shake when I think about it. Since that day, I've never gone back to that area. I've always made sure to bring someone with me when I venture out into the wilderness, even if it's just for a day hike. It was a lesson I'll never forget. And I'll never, ever forget that man, the one who almost made me his prey.